Another week, another office hours.
All
You ready to run
right.
through this one?
Absolutely. I think this could be our most engaging and exciting yet. I've been waiting to talk about this topic for a long time.
I agree. And I think we have some good tips and tricks, but also just good general practices that we'll be able to step through and share with everyone. So that way, we're not the only ones that know how to make it that much easier when it comes to change management throughout your DealHub environment. So it's going to be good.
Absolutely. So I think, should we start with housekeeping or should we start with other
Let's
stuff?
let's do other stuff. Let's do yeah, a story time before we dive into
Yeah.
the real topic, I guess, right?
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan.
So this
Since
week,
I'm,
yeah,
yeah, go
go ahead.
ahead. Go ahead. No, you go.
So this week, Ryan and I we were brainstorming like what's the thing that we could chat about or share that we're doing or into, and we're both the I don't know, I consider myself still amateur, but we both have 3D printers, and so we thought maybe we'd talk about how we use 3D printers and some of the projects that we've been able to complete with this in-home manufacturing tool. Um, so yeah, why don't you go ahead and start with one, and I can share a couple, Ryan, and share
Sure.
experiences and whatever. Yeah.
Sure, that sounds good. This will be good because I can get all this stuff off my desk that I keep knocking over. Um, yeah, so 3D printing's been really interesting to me for a long time. Like actually, when I went to UT way back in the early 2000s, they had some of the first 3D printers, like selective laser centering. It's these big like $1 million machines and all that, and we never got to like use them. We just heard about them. But now it's like so much more accessible. So I think my kids think that the 3D printer is just like a toy maker. Um, but one of the things that Brent, you might be talking about this too, that we've gotten really into is like my son's into Gravitrax,
Yes.
and you can buy the setup, but inevitably you want more attachments. And so we like constantly have pieces for the Gravitrax printing. Here's a little seesaw, so like this ball falls and then it makes all the other balls go down through this whole system. It's like building a Rube Goldberg thing.
Yep.
um and yes, so now I'm like flooded with pieces of this, but it's really neat because it's you can start to kind of conceptualize, oh, I want to add this to my Gravitrax, and then you just go online, you can find somebody's designed it. We've done some designing on different things, but not necessarily for Gravitax. But it's been a lot of fun. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, I have the startings of different
Yeah.
Gravitrax pieces and the marbles and all that, and um let's see, I took a couple of photos of some other projects that I have floating around the house. One of the very first ones was to build a larger hopper for our bird feeder that has a camera on it. So this is called a Bird Buddy. And it's great
Oh,
because it takes pictures of birds that are eating at your bird feeder and categorizes them for you and all this stuff, notifies you, hey, you have a new bird that you haven't had before. But the bird feeder hopper that came with it was really narrow. So the very first 3D printer project was to build a hopper that actually, allows for you not have to, not, so you don't have to fill up the thing every single day necessarily. Um, Tried to help organize the fridge with like a can containers. This took forever to print because it was also one of the very first ones. So I'm sure I had like all the 3D printer settings at like the slowest stages.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, toy manufacturing, balance beam for Barbies and everything
Balance
else,
beam.
right?
Looks
Yeah,
like Barbie fell off, but yeah.
she had a tough day at balancing for sure. Um, but yeah, it's great. And now it's like, how do you improve it? Like with everything, right? One of the things with those Gravitrax I've been having a tough time with is they have like a hexagon system that allows for you to connect everything together. But the little piece of the
Yes.
Gravitrax keeps on snapping off on me. So
Yes.
one
Uh-huh.
thing, I have to find a better design, or I have to design something myself that's like thicker or something. But also a technique I recently saw was, instead of just printing it flat, which makes it so that every line just melts on top of each other and makes it easy to break, design it so it's at a slight angle.
Mm,
And if you just design it at a slight angle and then use the automatic support system that usually comes with the
yes.
software, then you use a lot of plastic. So then it's getting into design and figuring out, well, how can you add a little wedge that supports it enough but doesn't burn through lots and lots of extra filament. So I was curious, have you taken that approach or seen it? It's a very nuanced thing around 3D printing, I guess, right? How to not waste
Y
stuff, but
yeah, every time I've added support structure, I get frustrated trying to remove it, but
yes.
you have a good point. It does add benefits. Nick, I'm a little bit upset that you didn't share with me this balance beam for Barbies, because now I wrote it on my thing. I gotta print that out. Like, my daughter has the whole Barbie dream house thing. This will be
Oh
perfect.
yeah. Yes. Well, it
It's gonna
was
be good.
rocket ships and everything else for a while for my son, and then I was like, well,
Yeah,
you know, she needs something too. So,
equal
yeah, we've
opportunity.
started manufacturing Barbie uh, items as well.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, yeah, I don't know. It's fun too, just to kind of share with everybody. It seems like everybody I know now has a 3D printer. So, well, the thing I learned about this weekend is a textured build plate can make your
Yes.
prints, like the surfaces of them, they look like they were manufactured. So, like when I do card things and stuff like that, it'll be really good. So, Amazon, it's supposed to be here today. Hopefully, we'll see.
Nice. And carbon fiber pattern, I'm assuming, was the go-to or something else?
No, I just went with textured, just
Okay.
textured. But the carbon fiber pattern is cool too. I had to start somewhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. There's always next week to get the next one too.
Yes, yeah, yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Well, so should we jump into I guess we could talk about housekeeping first. So
Yes.
if you're on the LinkedIn Live, welcome. Glad to have you here. If you'd like to, there's a Zoom link in the comments below, and you can hit that and come join us and ask us questions. You can get on video if you want and ask us questions, or drop them in the chat here. Either
Mhm.
way, you can drop them in the comments and chat in LinkedIn, but generally, I think like our stream is like 45 seconds behind. So if we don't get to it right away, then you know why. But our topic today is change management. And I know we kind of have like a structured way that we're going to walk through our thoughts and approach to change management, but this is one of those areas where I kind of feel like this is really a conversation. Like, we don't have it all figured out because everybody's situation is different. We'll kind of talk about that as we go through it. So definitely looking for any best practices that anybody out in the world has in their toolkit. Love to hear about them.
Absolutely.
So I think I start, Brendan. I think I've got my doc up. I'll share my
That's perfect.
screen, and then we can kind of hand it back and forth. So, you know, who owns DealHub? Usually it's RevOps, Sales Ops. I've seen go to market ops is the new thing, right? And it's there's an operational aspect to a job like that, but it's not it's not IT, right? And so I kind of started to think, well, what would I do if I were in the ideal world? I had all the time, I had all the resources available. Cost was not a concern, right?
Hmm.
Well, then you'd have like this ideal development cycle. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing, but it's more to articulate how rigorous it can be, right? It's something as simple as updating an approval flow or launching a new pricing for a single product. I mean, really, you should plan and analyze it. That includes, sitting down with the owner of the business requirements and gathering them, writing them all down, then coming up with the design for how you're going to implement it, architecting the solution, defining what that acceptance criteria looks like, and mirroring it back to your business user and saying, hey, is this going to work? Then updating the documentation all the way to starting development. And I would say, like, usually it goes from requirements, hey, do this, to writing code, is configuring in DealHub, right?
Yep.
And then hopefully you have time to do some testing. But to really test, you've got to test not only the change you did, you've got to test that change with all the integrations. So, the CRM, any other downstream effects, like if that data goes all the way to NetSuite, maybe if you're using DocuSign, all those integrations, you should be testing that. You should be regression testing. Regression testing means that you go and you say, well, this changed. Did it break all the other stuff I did in the past? Right. And so rigorous regression testing would have a bunch of use cases about how people use your quoting tool, and you'd step through each of those. Right. And I mean, in a legitimate software business, you if you your product was software, you'd probably automate regression testing, right? You use software to continuously go through it. And then, and only then you hand it to the target user and you say, hey, does this work? Sign off on it, right? I feel like I've talked longer than usually we move faster through a change because DealHub feels so easy, right? Then you prepare to deploy it, you schedule it, create a backup plan, and you roll it out. And there's even steps after that. So yes, it's a rigorous process that should go through every time you make a change, right? So in reality, we're all dealing with competing priorities and resources, right? So something as simple as, hey, change the price from $10 to $9 to an outsider can look so simple, right? So you want to move at the pace that the business needs, and sometimes it needs to happen with urgency, right? Somebody leaves the business, you need to update the approval flows by tomorrow. Pricing needs to be changed for the last 2 days of the quarter, and it has to happen now, right? So that's where you can't step through each one of these. And so you have to decide where you're going to compromise, right? And so what I think that we've done talking about change management is, and we've talked about this in some of our best practices, like the 10 things to do as a new DealHub admin. You want to treat the system as if you could be gone tomorrow. If somebody shows up and they look at a version, they should be able to identify what you did through your notes and so forth, right? We go a lot further. We actually document the change on a project board, and we track when the change was done and who did it. But, this is our business. We have a very rigorous process around it.
Yes.
So Brenton, I think we're going to talk about next, like, where we like to build. And this is probably one of the most, maybe not controversial, but debated topics of where do you build your changes? And we've seen people do it differently all over the place, right?
Yes.
And I think the two big different places that you build obviously are, like, when you get a DealHub environment, you have your production, you attach it to your production CRM, and you get your Sandbox DealHub, and hopefully you attach it to your Sandbox CRM, right? If you have one. So it's, if I were to look back up at the change management process, the 8-9 steps, right? Like, the obvious choice would be, well, obviously I need to build in Sandbox and then promote to production. And I took a shot at kind of writing out the pros and the challenges for each. And so maybe I'll just kind of run through these on the Sandbox side. Obviously, it's safer to build there, um, but we do encounter challenges, and this is where if you can't overcome these challenges, sometimes it makes sense to build in production, right?
Hmm.
So every business maintains their sandboxes differently, right? Um, some people rigorously create a snapshot sandbox with all its data every month, right? And if they do any changes like adding a field in Salesforce or creating an automation, they do it all in Sandbox. They promote it to production. That's the ideal state. A lot of times, what happens is somebody goes and stands by the Salesforce admin's desk and says, "Hey, I need this field right now." Well, they don't go build it in Sandbox. They build it in production, and then they make a note. Hey, let me pull this back down to Sandbox.
Right. When I have that free time
Yes, when I have the
that
free time, when
that
the
you
guy
schedule. Yeah.
when sales leader is not standing next to my desk, right? So we know how that works.
Yes.
Sandboxes, most sandboxes aren't at one-to-one parity with production unless you specifically take a snapshot, which for big changes, like we're going to build out renewals for a customer, we'll ask them to do that because now we know it's a gold copy of it, right? The next challenge is like most test users aren't in the CRM sandbox. They may have, obviously when you copy the sandbox, their users might show up, but they might not be functional. You got to unlock the user. They don't know how to log in. They get lost and so forth. So you have a much more limited test base, test
Yep.
user base. And then just going with the one-to-one parity, usually you're dealing with limited data or old data. I encountered this recently. We're doing renewal build outs and we're building it in a partial sandbox, but for 5 customers, I want replica of the data in production. Seems like not a big deal, but what happens is, okay, well, I need these 5 accounts. Okay, so I move those 5 accounts over. Oh, by the way, I need all the opportunities. Okay, move those over. Now I need all the quotes. Now I need all the opportunity products. And it becomes this big data migration exercise.
Yes.
Just,
And
but
it's
yeah,
different for, the way that partial sandbox environments are kept. It differs between CRM as well, right?
yes,
Salesforce provides the partial capability. HubSpot also provides partial or syncing of fields, but just because the fields are synced between the two environments, the data, the examples like you're talking about right here, right? The opportunity, the deal, the all the stuff that you are leveraging in DealHub to drive that renewal, that doesn't exist. So then you regardless of the location, you almost have to always have that go-to fictitious company
yes,
built out in a secondary environment that is representative of all or the majority of the situations that you're
use
going to be
cases.
facing in production, right?
Right, right. And that's a good point. So it, you know, Brenton and I's world's a little bit different. Like we walk into other people's environments and, we can't necessarily dictate that they have this pristine test account in each
Right.
environment, right? But if you have your own house where you both control Deal Hub and the CRM, you can control that, right? And you can make sure that you do that. Um, the other point here is that it can be challenging to activate. And actually, I was just talking earlier to some members of the team about this. What happens is if you copy from production, Deal Hub production to Deal Hub Sandbox,
Mhm.
you'll have a bunch of workflow rules that reference users. And if those users are not in your DealHub Sandbox, you can't activate. The only way to do it is to either change the users or delete the rules, right? And
Yes.
then that leads to another problem. Well, okay, I deleted all those rules or I changed the names on the workflow rules just so I could activate, I could test in Sandbox. Well, now I've fine tuned my version. I want to copy it back to production. It usually requires updates because I've got to either add those roles back or I got to change the users. It makes me nervous, right? I get real
Yeah.
nervous about like missing something.
Right.
Um, so that's another challenge. And then the last one is I talked about integrations, right? So a lot of times people don't have DocuSign integration, SendGrid integration, and so forth. That the system might be dependent on in Sandbox, so you just can't test that. So these are just kind of challenges to be aware of.
Hmm. Right.
Um, yeah,
But
Brent.
those
Yeah, go ahead.
challenges, uh, just to highlight, those mainly come when you try to replicate versions of DealHub between production and Sandbox. If you are just uh, using Sandbox as your test bed and rebuilding things every single time, a lot of these challenges do fall off, but now you have a new challenge. You're doing dual work, right? You're
Yes.
having to maintain two versions of the solution or the questions and the things that you're working on. Um, Maybe that's okay though. Maybe you only need to prototype a small capability. And so for that, Sandbox, building in Sandbox, confirming it's going to work as you expect, that makes a lot of sense. But if it is the whole flight of lifecycle management and change management of the solution, then a lot of these challenges you're going to face pretty early on.
Yes. Yes. And I'm just thinking about that, reflecting on last week. I was building in Sandbox and production at the same time. And I tend
Hmm.
to, what I do is I do it like I'll do three things and I do three things, do three
Hmm.
things, do three things. Otherwise, you have to keep a very detailed list of what you did, right?
Yes.
Um, because you could look at the change log in DealHub, but I've often been challenged to kind of try to parse out like exactly what it's not instructions on what to do, basically.
Right.
There's some level of interpretation.
Yes.
So I
Yeah.
guess like all those challenges of building and testing in Sandbox kind of bring us to we have this chart. It looks pretty heavily weighted over towards production, with a lot of caveats. And so I know I'm going to hand it back to Brenton to do a little demo here in a little bit, but um, there's a lot of pros for building in production. I mean, obviously it's fast, right? This is another reason why people build in Salesforce production, right? Simple things, adding a field, sure. Um, I'm not gonna build a flow and fully activate it in production if it's complicated.
Hmm.
Um, but you're able to easily test, right? So you have an inactive version at DealHub. You can go into sales mode. You can pull in data. You can watch how the system's using it. Like, and all your accounts are there. You can impersonate a user. Like, a lot of benefits. Not only that, but the data is accurate, right? So, like, exactly how it's going to interpret data from the CRM. You know how it's going to represent it on the quote, and so forth. All your fields and automations or et cetera are there. Um, and the rollout's obviously easy, right? Like, you're ready to go. You just hit activate. We'll talk about some best practices around that in a minute. And I I tend to be less. It just depends on the business that you're in, right? You have 1,000 sales users spread across the globe and a highly complex product that if y'all quote something wrong, it can have dramatic impact.
Hmm.
Then you're going to be a lot more cautious, right? But if you have 10 sales users and they're very understanding of the business, and if something goes out and it's obvious that there's an issue, they'll give you instant feedback. Then DealHub makes it easy to activate a change. You get feedback immediately, whether it's solicited or not, right? Like, so you can activate, then tell somebody to go do a quote, ask them if it works. But you have an easy rollback plan, right? You just activate the last version if you have a problem.
Hmm.
So those are the pros. I mean, the one challenge I thought of, aside from the obvious ones, are, you know, uh, if you sync quotes and so forth, when you're doing your testing, you're going to create data in production. So the one way to mitigate that is you have a dedicated test account, right? You make sure that there's exclusions on that account. Like don't let the opportunity show up in reports. Don't have
Mhm.
any automated communication go out when you close ops and so forth. But um, that is the one challenge. So how do you build in production, especially when you have multiple streams going on? You've got a quick price change, you've got some giant product rollout that you've been working on for 2 months. It's not going out for another month. How do you satisfy some of that if you're building in production? And so, Brenton,
Yeah,
I'll pop off the share here. And
sure. Yeah, and so when it comes to building in production, there are many ways to do it. Um, you could certainly just build questions in live in the flesh, if you will, making it so that everyone sees it. But maybe you add some notes. Maybe you add comments saying, "Don't use this yet." Make it red. Make it highlighted. Right. Whether or not that's good to draw attention to it, um, it's definitely a strategy that could be used. What we've learned over the years of working with DealHub, though, there are some ways you can discreetly build in production. Um, One of those would be setting permissions to items that you're defining in the playbook, making it so that only a certain user or set of users can see those questions. Um, that does bring a potential challenge if you are intrigued in shifting back and forth between production and sandbox, because the users don't live in both locations. They're always different users, different login names. Um, so that it can bring challenges if you take that approach. But there are some more generic implementations of rule-based permissions that you can use that make it realistic to build in production. And we've used this to the extent where we've built entire additive product lines for organizations in DealHub in production, making it so that they could see how it's going to look on proposals. They could test things out, and only when it was officially released and announced product line did we just make a couple of very small changes in their DealHub playbook and enabled all reps to quote using that new product line or that new template. All the while, admins or other product owners, they were able to actually test along the way and confirm it was going to work as expected. And so I have a little preview of that here to start with. I thought I just open up a playbook as a sales rep. And this sales rep is going to be able to go in and do everything they would normally do when it comes to interacting with questions. This is the same playbook I used for last week. So we have our virtual server capability, jump in, create quotes, do everything I need to do. But what if we wanted to preview merging questions together, or just, again, have different output documents? Some requirement that's been well defined, we want to build and ensure it's working as expected. Well, then we can take different approaches and what we've deemed admin switches, or that's the name we've kind of come up with. And the idea behind an admin switch is they're a set of questions, maybe even an entire question group that only system admin users of DealHub can see and interact with. Here I have them organized in a question group where the administrator can log in and say, "Oh, I want to change the look and feel of the playbook. I want to expose new questions." And these questions are always active in DealHub, but the visibility triggers are what make all the difference, right? It's always on, therefore the selection to show or hide an item is always running in the playbook, so that when a sales rep is logging in, they don't have the option to expose that new feature, functionality, product line. They're just using the playbook that they know while things are kind of happening under the covers.
one cool thing that you wouldn't know unless you went through the process of doing it. I assume like you hid all of those questions for non-admins, and then If
Yes,
all of those questions are hidden in the background, the question group disappears too, right? Like I saw when you switched over your sales
that's right.
rep view, he doesn't see like admin question group, right?
Doesn't even
Yeah.
see it. Um, that's exactly right. And you could do this in line, right? You could use some highlighting and labeling to have certain questions that are admin only questions show up in line with others. A common situation we use, especially helping organizations build and test, would be a admin question that allows for us to change the opportunity type of the proposal from a new business proposal to a renewal proposal without having to go all the way back to Salesforce or Hubspot and create a new opportunity that would be driving that typically. So allowing for those changes to happen, from the playbook, it's a huge time saver as well. It makes it really easy to test and deploy and everything else. Um,
Yeah. And I don't think, I mean, this is taking it a step farther, but you want admins to see it. And then sometimes the admins have two trusted users that they want
yes,
to pull in, right? Like maybe it's the leader of the CS team, leader of the sales team. And so how do you expose it to them? Well, you don't want to give them admin capability. So using something like user groups, which, have specific purposes in DealHub, and this is one place where there can be really good, is you can use a user group to expose certain things to people. So you could set the default on your enable starter package question to show for user group test users. What's cool about those user groups is you can change them without activating a version. I mean, that's what I love about the user group. So you can pull people in and out and stuff like that. So like by laying these admin switches kind of lays the groundwork for I think we try to avoid like big bang layout rollouts, right? Like you don't want to build something for 6 months and everybody gets all super excited, and then you roll it out, and then all the salespeople see it and they're like, "This isn't what I wanted." So you
yes.
want to slowly like you want to bring people into the fold. Like, okay, all right, admin, start using it, start testing it. Okay, trusted users, start using it, start testing it. So by the time it goes live, I mean, all you're doing is switching a button, right?
That's
You're
right.
just you're just setting that to show or whatever it might be. And
And you can add more layers too. I've had scenarios where a new product line was being built in Deal Hub, and it was imperative that a new subscription record was never created in the production environment until that go live date. But we needed to test. We needed to make sure everything was working. So what we did was, in addition to the admin function questions, just as you see here, hiding and showing different playbook experiences, we also built on top of that validation rules. If ever there was a product that aligned with that product line, and using the counter method that we've discussed in uh, previous sessions, if there was ever a product being quoted, prevent that quote from even syncing back to Salesforce or HubSpot. So
Mhm.
that way you're not tainting the active um, reporting metrics that are important to the business. And it's only the day that it's released do you actually start expanding, the users that could do that, or um, rolling it out to the full team.
Yep.
Um, and we've talked about approvals a bit as well today. So another thing that you can do, and you can kind of hide and organize in this way using a question group, is inside of DealHub, there is the ability to impersonate different roles. This is just a feature that's native to the solution, but it comes in handy when you're trying to figure out, well, how come that manager can't approve a deal that's being discounted over 50%? And maybe it's just a alignment. It could be a role typo or something like that. And you can use this feature to actually test some of that functionality. So here, let's see. Oh, no, pardon me. I have a frog in my throat. Ryan, I'll let you take the floor for a second.
Yep. And what I'd say about that role impersonation is it's not necessarily the uh, most straightforward the first time you build it out. So if that feels like something that you might want to take advantage of, reach out to us, because it definitely can save you from making a mistake and having an approval workflow that's not working properly, right? The last thing you want to do is find out that your approval workflow hasn't been working for a particular role at the last day of the month when somebody's trying to get a quote out and so forth.
That's right. Sorry, I try to avoid coughing into the mic and everything. Hopefully, I caught it.
You did, you're good.
All right. Yeah. So, for example, we can see here, I could jump in, say that there's a 50% discount, and see, oh, yeah, workflows are firing, but let's make sure that, I don't know, if the sales manager were running this quote, oh, man, this needed to be closer to 30, I think, actually. Well, would the sales manager be able to approve it? Would they be able to, would they receive that workflow or not? And so without having to log in and log out, just being able to impersonate their roles uh,
Mm-hmm.
really allows for an easier way to test a few different aspects of what's going on quoting wise as well.
So this kind of goes back to that regression testing line item on the more rigorous rollout, right? Like build taking the time, you spend an hour, you build this in, and it will make it easier, as one of your checks as you're like adding new functionality. Okay. All right, let me test my discounts as this roll, this roll, this roll, boom. And then you do all the tests in 10 minutes, right?
Yes.
And you can ensure that all the approvals are firing for that.
Yep. That's it. So that was a little demo I set up for today, just kind of showing in context what we've been talking about. And also I wanted to circle back on one point you brought up earlier around testing. It's
Yes.
important not only to preview what values are going to land in the summary portion or even on the quotes that get generated, but then to ensure everything get writes back properly to Salesforce or HubSpot. You really do need a few opportunities to actually go through the full close process. Make sure that
Yes.
there isn't another workflow that's updating fields as soon as that deal closes that you're not expecting. In HubSpot, you have to close a deal before certain elements fire and get written to the records. Um, so, yes, you do want to try to, lightly test it at first, but it is important to go all the way, especially as you get closer to that go live mark.
Yes. Yes. And to that point, in order to do the things you talked about, you have to activate the version, right? So
Hmm.
you got to be able to get to a point where you can activate it, whether it's in Sandbox or in production. And you may not know if you have a sync issue until you try to write the data back. Like
Yes.
sometimes I think about like pick lists in Salesforce. I'm Brent, you know better about HubSpot, but like if you create a new pick list value and the pick list is restricted in Salesforce, you won't know that until you try to sync a quote back, right? So you got
That's
to
right.
activate it and do that.
That's right.
Um,
And that's a potential risk copying versions between sandbox and production, at least for HubSpot. Sometimes the way you reference lists, you need to
mm-hmm.
use the visible label. Other times you need to use the API. And
Yeah.
we found out the hard way, if those two aren't the same in both production and sandbox, you're going to run into some challenges. Um,
Yes.
so yeah, lots to consider.
Well, then that just kind of rolls into. I think I'll go through these last few things and then we can wrap. Just considerations around the CRM when you're doing changes. You know, make sure you're thinking about the users, the fields, the automations, reports, and data. When you're testing, I mean, this should be the minimal of the list of things that you're kind of rolling through, no matter what the change is, right? Um, and then the last piece to talk about, and this is kind of timely. We've been using this for a good amount of time to make
Yeah,
decisions about when to activate. I mean, obviously, you want to activate overnight or off hours if that's an option. Uh, because if you activate when somebody's in the middle of a quote, it'll they'll lose their progress, right? So one nice thing that's been added probably in the last year, 6 months, is the session activity. And if you go into your what's new in DealHub, I think it's the one that's at the top of the list right now.
it
It'll show
is.
you
Yep.
exactly, yeah, it'll show you exactly where to turn this on. This is like a no-brainer. You turn on session activity, it instantly gives you this new screen on the user screen where you can see who's in there and what they're doing. And so we've got Max for Stappen. He's not racing. I guess he's in here doing a quote and it's taking him forever. But it you can see who's doing stuff, and so you can decide, right? Like, and so oftentimes if we have an emergency change, we'll go in here and you can tell if somebody's been on a quote for 90 minutes, they're not doing anything, right? But if they've been in here for 10 minutes, then they're actively doing something. You can reach out to them and say, hey, save, back out for a second. You can activate, and then they'll open the quote back up and they'll be in the new version. So
Yep.
it just really kind of reduces your risk.
Yes. And just to add a couple more points to this as well, if I'm not mistaken, you can actually use this to go to the proposal that rep is working on. And if you want to
Yes.
be really interactive, you could use Deal Chat right from the DealHub interface and say, hey, what's going on with this proposal? Are you actively working on it? And depending on that user's notification settings, they might get an email, they might get a Slack message. Or, of course, if you have your internal communication tools, you can go knock on the door of a few people and say, hey, are you really still working on that? Um, Another thing that I look at when deciding is this an activation that's going to impact users is if you have an understanding of how quick your quoting process is, that also might help you understand, well, is this something I can activate during business hours, or do I need to wait for off peak hours? If your
Mm-hmm.
teams are taking less than a minute to create proposals, then an activation really is going to catch many people out. And they won't even notice anything other than the version changed, and all of a sudden, whatever new playbook or product enhancements you've made kind of go live. If it is a proposal that needs to remain open on that user's desktop for 45 minutes, 2 hours, whatever it is, then you definitely don't want to be disruptive to them. Yes, you can always just reach out, ask them to save their progress so that you can continue with the activation, or wait till later in the day, off peak hours, and run an activation. Um, but yeah, the time it takes to create proposals can also help you understand. Could we just roll something out quickly today, or do we need to wait?
It's a great point.
Awesome.
Did we
Well,
miss anything?
I'll take a look at my notes, and I think we've touched on everything we were planning on for today. So this has been a good session, and hopefully everyone has been able to take at least one little piece that you're going to be able to leverage for your change management process with DealHub. And like we said at the opening, these are just our ideas. We'd love to continue the conversation and hear about other techniques and strategies, and anything else that you face when dealing with change management and DealHub as well.
Absolutely. All right. Should we wrap on that?
I think that's perfect. Until next
All right.
week.
All right. See everybody next week. Thanks.